Welcome back, listeners, to a brand new episode of the New Standard. And you're checking out the program on March 7th, 2024. I want to give a big shout out to all the March birthdays. I want to give a big shout out to my partner in crime, my co host, Neil Coulong, who is still on sabbatical. He is still in space, orbiting Jupiter on his way to Saturn to orbit the rings of Saturn. So, with that, I hope he travels safely as he orbits again Saturn, not the car, but the planet. And as always, listeners, if you want to take part in the program, please support with a like and a subscribe. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell so you can get your brand new content. And the title of this particular program, and let me not forget to say that if you want to get the show via podcast, go to however you do a podcast, your reader, your feeder, and do a search for the New Standard. And the title of this particular program is I'm going to assume we disagree. Because I'm going to say some things on this particular program that is probably, or that will probably rub a lot of people right. And I want to use some information from some guys on Twitter. One, Trey Essex, former Steeler, a coach, Jim Ricalta. I want to give him a shout out because I want to speak to his text or his tweet. And also, I want to give a big shout out to at MP Frazier for his particular tweets or his X's and some of the reasonable things that he says online. But let me start it out by saying this. Can reasonable Steeler fans disagree? And I'm going to hope that as Steeler fans, reasonably, we can disagree. And hopefully the mic was loud enough. I had to readjust the mic. Sorry about that. Hopefully we can disagree. But my gut tells me that Steeler fans can't disagree. And right now in the fan base, there is a huge divide on the quarterback position for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Whether it should be Justin Fields, whether it should be Russell Wilson, whether it should be Mason Rudolph or Kenny Pickett. There's a huge level of disagreement in the fan base. And I'm not sure we can reasonably disagree. I mean, I think people are just taking strong sides. I want Kenny. I want Russ. I want Just. I want May, son, Rudolph. And so people are taking these very aggressive stances one way or another. And the one thing I do want to say is, although we're talking about the topic in the discussion, Steelers don't give a rat's ass what I think. And for good reason. They don't pay me. I don't watch their film. I'm not a football coach. My opinion shouldn't mean shit to them. And I hope it doesn't. But I hope my opinion means something to you because we're all in this alike. We're fans of the team, and I'm observing on what I'm seeing. So hopefully reasonable fans can disagree, but I don't think so. Because of the things that I've said about Kenny Pickett, I don't know anything about football. I've been put into the Kenny Pickett apologist group, so on and so forth. Look, I don't want Mason Rudolph to be the starter. Sorry. I lived through Cliff Stout, Kent Graham, Jim Miller, and a host of others. I know what bad quarterbacking or average quarterbacking looks like. It's funny that I say that because I know somebody's going to say, mark the tape, 436. If he knew what bad quarterbacking looked like, he wouldn't be pro Kenny. And I don't know if I'm pro Kenny. I'm just saying I'm pro give Kenny a chance, a real chance, because I want to ask you guys two questions and think about these questions. Is Kenny Pickett a victim of circumstance, And has Kenny Pickett been set up for success? Now, I want to answer this question with some great metrics that were posted on X by at Coach Racalto. That's at Coach as it's spelled Racalto, Jim Racalto. And he wrote the following, and we echoed some of this on the show. Me and Neil broke some of this down. He said, if you look at Matt Canada's pass scheme, the most glaring issues were he called too many curls, hitches, and outs. These routes run right into most zones. Hook curl, flat deep third, and don't stress man coverage without man beaters attached to them. In other words, defenders were put into conflict and primaries weren't schemed open. Defenders weren't put into conflict and primaries weren't schemed open. He didn't sequence off the run game or pass game. Plays weren't called to set up other plays. Way too reliant on basic concepts, hoping wide receivers would win. This led to the Steelers' routes being the fourth most perfectly covered in the National Football League on a play-by-play basis. Arthur Smith does these things much, much better, particularly sequencing off of the running game. And again, big shout out to Jim Racalto. Follow him on Twitter. I thought this was an outstanding tweet. And sometimes when you're on Twitter or X, you run into those. And I'm going to make sure I follow him because I can tell just from that tweet, this man knows about football because he's explaining his position in a well-reasoned way. With that being said, let's go back to the question of, is Kenny Pickett a victim of circumstance? And has Kenny Pickett been set up for success? When you hear the comments of Coach about the scheme, he's basically saying you couldn't have success in the scheme. Because now, the one thing I honestly, I'll say this is I'm sure Matt Canada understands zone coverage and concepts and passing concepts to beat zone coverage better than me, Coach Ricalto, Neil, anybody else you might listen to. And again, you're checking out the new standard. The title of the program is I'm going to assume we disagree. With that being said, it's hard to surmise why the offense looks so stale and so static and so easily defensible. Now, that's the $1,000,000 question. Was it Pickett? Was it Tomlin? Was it the offensive line? What was the reason why the offense was so static? And I'll probably tell you it was a combination of all of those things. And it should be a combination of all those things. Combination of the scheme, because you have the concepts in your scheme readily available for you to call to the conservative nature of defensive coaches. And we talked about that before. 3, offensive line, porous pass protection. And I know you guys hate PFF, and we're going to probably not use PFF more going forward, but just as a reference, the Steelers were the worst pass blocking rated offensive line in the National Football League. You throw that in, and it's a cluster. It's an absolute cluster. So when you have a young player, in my opinion, matched with a bad coordinator, he is not being put into position to succeed. That he is a victim of circumstance and has not been set up for success. But his obligation as the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers is to rise above that and play the best football he can. Now, it was no mystery to me that once Matt Canada, his offense or he wasn't calling plays, or he got fired, or after he got fired, it wasn't surprising to me that Kenny Pickett looked like a functional player in the Cincinnati Bengals game. Now, what I also think this is saying is the Steelers acknowledge that the Canada hire was a massive failure and that they made Kenny a victim of circumstance and did not set him up with success. That's why they went and got Arthur Smith. And if they believe that, that is why I think as well, they're not aggressively going to try to get Fields or Russell Wilson. And we'll talk about those. So I think when the coaching staff looks at Kenny as a player, of course, they see things that we don't. You know, we see our emotions, we see color. Oh, I don't want to see him. I can't win a Super Bowl with Kenny, so on and so forth. Who knows if you can win a Super Bowl with Kenny Pickett or not? I would guess that you probably can't. But hell, who beats Patrick Mahomes in Super Bowls anyway? Oh, the GOAT, the 7-time Super Bowl champ. I mean, you might have to be the GOAT quarterback to beat Patrick Mahomes in a Super Bowl. So I'm not going to necessarily fault Kenny Pickett for not being able to win a championship and beat Patrick Mahomes. Is my expectation that they win a playoff game? Absolutely. You got to win playoff games to get an opportunity to win a championship. But again, I think the moves that you see, particularly with the changing of the offensive staff with Arthur Smith, I think they're admitting flat out, we have not put Kenny Pickett in the best circumstances, and we have not set him up for success. Now, there were some other comments I wanted to jump into. And there was an interesting comment as I flipped through to the comment from Trey Essex. But before I jump into that, I want to jump into a comment from Mike Frazier. And again, you're checking out the new standard. The name of the program is I'm going to assume we disagree. And I hope you disagree with me so much that you hit me with a like and a subscribe. Get pissed off and hit that damn like button and subscribe to the show. And Mike wrote the following: it's going to take exactly what I've said it would take, seeing Pickett without Matt Canada's offense and play calling. If he doesn't rise up with an offensive coordinator who has seen success at a pro level, then the Steelers should move on. I trust the coaching staff who see Pickett in practice on a weekly basis over a guy who won, and fans who won didn't play quarterback and haven't been around the team on a daily basis in years. I like Ryan a lot, but he's not in the locker room. He's talking about another guy he's responded to. But I think those comments, and again, big up to Mike Frazier. Check out at MP Frazier on X. As much as we think, I think, Mike thinks, everybody on Twitter thinks they know, they don't know. And that's not to say you don't know about football. That's to say you don't know how Pickett prepares. You don't know how he plays. You don't know the circumstances around the offense. We're all just judging the results. And the results are clear. The offense was bad, very bad. And we saw that because of the points per game they scored, because they changed the staff, so on and so forth. But I'm where Mike is. Until we see Kenny Pickett in a functional, professional offense, in fairness to him, and I know you're like, F fair. This is the National Football League, the no fair league. I think they can't accurately assess what they have in Kenny Pickett because the circumstances, meaning the offense and what he was asked to do, it was just, it was unfair. It was unattainable. Or it was untenable, I should say. Excuse me. I did go to Berkeley, but I do flub words, so excuse me. It was untenable. It was an untenable situation. And so I think Kenny is given the benefit of the doubt. But I will say this: He's on the clock. So now, lastly, I want to jump into. I am glad that I think it was Mike DeFeo came out and talked about how uh, rumors are pretty much that the whole Russ Wilson and the whole Russell Wilson stuff is dead. That's done, and the Justin Fields stuff is done as well. And I agree 1,000% with a couple of these tweets. And it's a tweet from Warren Sharp, Sharp Football. Um, and it's a tweet from Trey Essex, former Steeler, Super Bowl champion. And Trey Essex wrote the following. My main issue with Fields is that he is still a project. This would be his fourth offensive coordinator in 4 years. He has to unlearn and learn things at the same time. Same with Kenny Pickett. We have other issues on the offense. Do we really want our OC in his first year in Pittsburgh to devote the time necessary to develop two quarterback projects at the same time? So if you're not going to trust me, trust Trey Essex, a guy who played the game, a guy who won a championship with the Steelers, a guy who played offensive line and has been in meeting rooms with Steelers, been around offensive coordinators. What he is basically saying is Justin Fields might be Kenny Pickett. So if that's the case, why take the chance on a guy putting him in his fourth system in 4 years? Just coach the guy you got. Unless you think as a staff it is an overwhelming upgrade, stay away. Stay away. Because you also got to get a guy a long-term contract. And last but not least, it feels like the Russell Wilson escapade is over before it started. Keep Russ the hell away from the kitchen. Let me jump into some stats from Warren Sharp at Sharp Football. Trey Essex, I believe, is at Trey Essex. You can find him both Warren Sharp, Coach Trey Essex, everybody on X or on Twitter. He wrote the following: some wild marks from Russell Wilson last year. He threw 27% of his passes behind the line of scrimmage, first highest out of 509 quarterbacks since 2005. He threw 62% of his passes within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, second highest out of 509 quarterbacks since 2005. What's that tell you? Want to know what it tells you? It tells you, and Warren astutely wrote it, Sean Payton had no confidence in Wilson's intermediate passing. So if you guys complain about Kenny Pickett not throwing between the numbers and over the middle of the field, did you hear those numbers I said? Number one highest out of 509 quarterbacks with throws behind a line of scrimmage. Number two highest out of 509 quarterbacks within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage since 2005. Let me top this. Let me put the bow on this gift. The 2023 Broncos had the least amount of intermediate passing of any offense since 2005. Wilson threw just 26% of his passing since 20. Let me say that again. 26% of his passes between 5 and 15 yards downfield. I mean, what are we talking about? A 35-year-old weirdo short guy that can't attack the entire football field. So what if that costs you $2.5 million because Denver is footing the bill? It's still a wasted year if you bring this guy in. And no, I am not Landstradamus. I am not looking into my mental picture and seeing what's going to happen in the future. But I know this. Got to stay away from Russell Wilson. Got to absolutely Stay away from Russell Wilson. And I'm glad that it looks like the Steelers are not going to go down that path. This is a guy that's 35 that can no longer play. Just think of this, right? You talk about Russell Wilson. They gave up two firsts, 2 seconds, a fifth, three players, and a fourth to get Russell Wilson. They then gave him a $242 million contract. In return, they got back-to-back losing seasons and $85 million in dead cap. Might be the worst deal in NFL history. But with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude the program. And I'm going to assume we disagree. I think the Steelers should, they will, and I hope they give Kenny Pickett another season to see what he can do and what he is in a real professional schemed offense with a real offensive coordinator. And shame on Mike Tomlin for putting that kid with Matt Canada. So we're going to see how much of it was Matt, how much of it was Kenny. I'm going to assume we disagree and you guys think it was all Kenny. But with that, we're going to conclude the program. And as always, tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe.